Hello, friends. Welcome to Talk Tuesdays. I'm Laura Gonzalez, Director of Education here at Santa Fe's premier living history museum, El Rancho de las Golondrinas. We're located out in the beautiful and historic La Cienega Valley. We are very excited today to introduce a new little mini lecture series called Talk Tuesdays. We have one scheduled for every Tuesday the entire month of April. I'm very excited to welcome our first guest speaker, Las Golondrinas volunteer, tour guide, and exceptionally skilled miller, Mr. Gordon Mark. Today he is going to be presenting on mills of the Mora Valley. Sort of? All right, without further ado, pleased to welcome Mr. Gordon Mark. Hope you enjoy.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you for showing up. What I'm going to talk about today are the mills of Mora Valley, sort of, because a couple of the mills are were never in the Mora Valley, including the one here at Las Golondrinas. What I want to talk about first is some people ask questions about when did wheat and milling show up in northern New Mexico? The answer is in 1598. They came with Oñate. He brought millstones with him, and I don't know whether there was, a millstone is a set, so the millstones plural is 2 stones. Now, whether that was just a set of stones or a number of sets, I don't know. He also brought, I think, somewhere around 240 fanegas of wheat, and everybody says, what's a fanega? And I looked and I looked and I looked. So this is the answers I found. Notice I said answers. 1.5 bushels. I found one for 2 bushels, generally considered 2.5 bushels. And in the last one, and I asked one of our board members who is the history person in the state, and he said it varies. So it depends on where you're at. Now, what I'm going to do is, from that first mill came the small Spanish mills, which I'm only going to briefly cover today, and I don't have any photographs, so it's really not part of the presentation. But the mills came down from 1598 until the last one that we know was used commercially or family mills was in 1975. And that was the Maximiliano Cruz Mill it's in Mora now. It's in Cleveland. They're sort of together. The other mill is the other mills are, most of them are gone. We have evidence of about 450 mills. Of that 450 mills, are probably more than that. Only 10 are left. 3 of those are here at Las Golondrinas. And there's only one that still runs, and that's our little mill here, the Truchas Mill, which came from Truchas. If you're interested in that particular mill, there is a video on the Golondrinas channel on YouTube or the website on Facebook. Now, what I'm going to do is, what happened was when the Army came, we're fast forwarding to 1850, when the Army came in 1850, they looked at the little mills and they said, the wheat the flour you're putting out from these mills isn't good. It's not adequate enough. And my guess is they probably didn't have the volume the Army needed. They have the Army, they have then indigenous people who are at the reservations. There are people hanging around the mills, around the forts, particularly Fort Union, and the families of the people at Fort Union. There just weren't enough volume. So I'm going to introduce a person to you and is Ceran Saint Vrain. And he was not a miller, oddly enough. He was an entrepreneur. So I'll give you a little background on him because he's kind of interesting. And he basically brought the commercial mills to northern New Mexico. His family, the Saint Vrain family, were part of the French nobility and had the good sense to leave right before the French Revolution. They settled in St. Louis, which at the time was French. Ceran was born there in 1801. Now, his father died when he was in his early teens or so, and he was apprenticed to a fur trader in what is now Kansas City, basically. It was called Westport then. And he was apprenticed. The apprenticeship usually lasts about 7 years. He got bored with that and left, headed west. He understood the fur trade. He'd worked in the fur trade. So he took on as a fur trapper, which is one, dangerous. Two, it's not very, it's dangerous, it's a lot of work, and you don't really get anything from it. And so he switched from a fur trapper to the fur trader, knowing he would make more money. And then later he became a trader on the Santa Fe Trail. Now, when the Army came in, they needed mills. He went back to Westport, Kansas City, and he purchased or acquired 5 sets of millstones. There are 2 stones in each set. And he's not a miller. He's an entrepreneur. He brought back millers. He set up a large mill in Taos. And it was a wooden mill, that's important. And he also had another smaller mill up there, I believe. He then took out a contract with the Army for a lot of flour, a very lucrative contract. Unfortunately, remember I said it was a wooden mill? It burned down right when he took the contract out. He had a small mill, and we'll kind of go over these in just a minute, a small mill in Mora, which is in eastern New Mexico. And so he came to the Mora Valley and built a large mill there. He then later, he became a naturalized citizen of Mexico. He settled in the Mora Valley somewhere around 1850, 1867. I think he probably was going back and forth to Taos. Taos was the main wheat growing area in the state at the time. The Mora Valley was the second. He died in 1870, and the top photograph in the slide is his gravestone, and the people in Mora who were involved with the mill, the St. Vrain Mill there, keep that up. And below, of course, is a picture of that. Now, St. Vrain had 3 basic mills. The one in Taos from 50 to 64, that burned down. A small wooden mill, this is a very small mill, and it was called El Molino Viejo, which means the old mill. He had taken out military contracts. And the last mention of the small mill in Mora was in 1877, so that's like 140 years ago. There is nothing left. It's all been rebuilt. It was right on the Mora River, and there was nothing left. And so in fact, the people there didn't even know about it. And I looked it up when I was doing some research on St. Vrain. Now, he built a stone mill, and that's the one that's in the picture there. And this was used from 1864 to 1933, and I'll get into what happened to that a little bit later. And from 76 to the present, it's undergone a restoration. Now, the photograph that is there is what it looked like when I first came there. And I stopped and parked on the other side of the road and took some pictures. And then I thought I would go around and photograph some of the windows And then I went around in the back and I noticed the door in the back had sort of been kicked in. So I sort of broke in. I did not go in very far. You'll see why in just a second. Actually, a couple slides down. What happened, I got in there and I said, this isn't safe. And I didn't feel like I was kind of trespassing on, I didn't know what, it was private land or whatever. And there wasn't enough light in there to photograph anyway. And so I didn't go in that far. Now, what I want to show you is this is kind of how, the image on the right or the left is kind of how the mills work. You have a flume that comes down, turns a water wheel, and then you go into what's called a lantern gear. Now these are usually, and the Romans invented this, the lantern gear is usually made out of wood. A lot of wooden gears. They wear out faster, but they're quieter, and you don't need to grease them as much. The stones are right above it, and then you go down into the bin down there. Now, the first mill, the water wheel was a turbine, and this is the one on the right, the image on the right. The problem with turbines is they're very complicated. You have to get the parts from the East Coast. And if it breaks down, you got to get a new mill or a new turbine. So this is the turbine, and you see all the parts for this, and later it got changed to, I've got to figure this out here. Okay, this is the St. Vrain Mill, 64 to 33. And this is a photograph from 1934 of the mill. Now, if you look in the front of it, there's a structure on the front with two like doors or windows or something. That's not there. The creek in here is gone. In fact, there's a road right where that creek is right now. I think there's a bridge underneath it. But you can kind of see the mill. And if you look at the window on the right, you'll see a crack going down the side of the building. The crack got bigger. And I'll kind of tell you why in a little bit. Anyway, so this is courtesy of the New Mexico State Archives. You have to mention that. That way you can use the picture because it's protected. I went into the state archives and wanted some pictures, and I asked them if I could copy the pictures in there, and they said yes, but you have to give us credit for it. And they gave me a little plaque to put down when I photographed it. Okay, now, the picture on the right, and this is kind of interesting, the picture on the right shows a kind of porch on the second story. Generally, mills have a basement, but the water table is so high in Mora that a basement would end up a swimming pool. And when I went up the first time, they pulled up a floorboard, and it was dirt. And so the machinery and stuff is on the first floor, which would normally be the basement, and then they delivered the wheat and stuff to wagons from the second floor. And then the photograph on the right is a metal water wheel. Metal wheels last quite a while, by the way. Now, this is what's left. Actually, it's more than that. I'll talk a little bit about it a little bit later. These photographs were taken a while back, and they have since started the restoration on the mill, and it has changed, and I'll point some of that stuff out in a little bit. They have the people who are doing the restoration, which is the St. Vrain Mill Preservation Historic Foundation or something. You can look it up and go over the stuff that they've done. They have a website. They have rebuilt the porch. They said it's part of it. Let's put that back on. So they take on, as money comes in, they take they do little projects or big projects or whatever. But anyway, that's the front door also. Now, the brief history of the mill. It was constructed in 64 as a stone mill using French quartz burrstones. Burrstones are millstones. And quartz or chert, which is a form of quartz or flint, is usually what's used for the millstones. And usually, and if you look at the one here at Las Golondrinas, the stone is actually about 1 inch thick. The rest of it's plaster. So it's easier, and they usually come from France. In 83, Fraley put a flume and a steam engine in, but returned to water power in 64. There was no mention of why. My guess is, one, in the 19th century, steam engines were dangerous, and they had a tendency to blow up if you weren't careful. The real reason, I think, is you have to have fuel. And if you're burning coal or wood or whatever to make the steam, you have to buy it, which gets into your profit. So I think they just went back to the water. They had, there was a whole list of things I got on what was done, and they added in 1901, they put in a new flume. It was a really long flume, I guess. And in 1913, Tremblay converted it to a roller mill. And I'll talk about roller mills at the end, because they're a modern mill. Now, and he added a wooden water wheel. Wooden water wheels, if you're not taken care of, or if you just use them, only last about 10 years. And in 1915, they added a new iron wheel. And I'll show you that in the next slide. The mill was used as a warehouse from 34 to 73. And there was some effort to restore it. In 1944, I found two explanations of why most of the mill parts were gone. The most logical one was in 1944, the iron parts were taken out for the war effort. So we'll go to the next slide, and if you look at the slide on the left, you'll see the big crack. This is why I didn't go in the mill very far. I said, well, it's not dangerous. It might be dangerous in there. The photograph on the right is the water wheel, and you notice the struts are gone. So they unbolted the struts so they could turn those in. And this is the front or the south facade, and you can see the whole thing. The sort of adobe paint on the bottom is to cover the graffiti, of course. And then they have a sign up there to say that they are, the Mill Foundation put this up. They have a sign there so that, and you know they were actually doing something. And if you kind of look, you'll see that the windows are gone on the top, and the wood is kind of out of place and so forth. That's all been changed. They would take a project and go from there. This again is the east facade, which is the previous slide I showed you. This is the crack. And the reason they thought this crack occurred, one was the high water table. The ground is soft. The other reason was that when this was a storehouse or a warehouse, they stored tractor wheels up there, which are very heavy, and that added a lot of weight to the mill, forcing it over. What they have done, and this was the major thing they had to do to make the mill safe for people to be there, was they put piers down 20 feet with cement and then poured about 10 feet of what they call grout, which is probably some kind of liquid cement, to stabilize things. There's no real way to push that back up to make it work. But that was one of the major expenses. When I looked at this, I said someone with really deep pockets if they're going to restore it. And so they've taken a little bit of the time. They've been doing this for about 5 or 6 years now. This is the west facade, and if you look at the west facade, you'll see the crack on that side. Although it doesn't look as bad, it's actually worse. And currently, this is what they're working on. They want to stabilize this, then they'll go around to the other facade to finish that. This is the north facade, and if you look, you'll see the windows are gone. The door is sort of there, and if you look where the separation between the wood and the stone, if you look at that carefully, you'll see it's bowed out. And they thought they were going to have to take out that whole end, put structure under there and take that out and redo it. However, the contractor was able to pull that. It was out a foot. I went up and looked at it. And he was able to pull it in and stabilize everything. Then the windows again were fixed, and the woodworking has been fixed too. This is the water wheel. They did find the center of the water wheel down in the water, and they dug it out. But again, and we couldn't figure out how they floated it to make it go around, or where the bearings were, or whatever. This is the interior of the first floor. The photograph on the right has the doorway. That's the only way in. And the stairway had to be rebuilt, and so they did rebuild that, and they used parts of it. If you look at the photograph on the right, that's just 180 degrees. The kind of outline in the back where the door is, they've rebuilt a door, and they made a set of stairs, because it does go down, out of some of the usable parts from the stair, but it was worn out completely. They've since added lights and all kinds of good things in there, and they use it sparingly. They don't really have a permit to open it up for different things. This is some of the interior. The windows have all been replaced now. These are parts. There's, if you look on the left side, the down one, there's a machine there, and I have no idea what that's for, and I've looked at the stuff. I looked in my mill books. I don't know what it's for, but it's there. And there's a lot of other stuff. This is the second floor. The one on the picture on the right and is a loader to load sacks of flour. The one on the left is just a close-up of that. You can see the graffiti that the kids put in there. And this is called an auger. Our mill here has one, and we'll see that in a little bit. And there are a lot of parts in there, and unfortunately they cleaned it up before I got there, because I'm not sure they didn't throw things out that they probably shouldn't have. I don't know. This is turnaround, and this is where the millstones would have been. Again, no window. These have been replaced. Now this is a grain elevator, and that's my hand out there holding the grain elevator, and I said, you need to keep this. So it floats around the mill, but it's still there. On the right side is the grain elevator at our mill here. I happen to have that photograph. So that's how it works. And I'll show you some elevators later. Now, this is the third floor, and I walked up there, very knowledgeable, right? And I said, well, that thing behind the yellow caution thing, that's a bolter, which is a flour sifter, by the way. And the one over to the left, well, that's a separator. And then I'm walking over there thinking, maybe I shouldn't have opened my mouth, because I was right. It said separator on the end of the box. So, and they told me, yeah, that's a bolter. And if you look at this, you can see the roof is gone, and you look out there, and it's kind of open back there. I thought it was an interesting place. Unfortunately, they fixed it all before I could go back and re-photograph it. But anyway, this is a separator, and now these are flexible rods. They've broken them off for a commercial bolter, which is almost a large room. And they move around, and when we get to the Cleveland Mill, I'll show you what they look like. But these are just this is what's left. And this is the problem with the old mills. They are not complete. This is a Sanchez Mill. And I found a reference to a Sanchez Mill, a Gordon Mill, no relation to me, and a Gordon Sanchez Mill. And when I went up to Mora the first time with the foundation, I asked one of the members who grew up in Mora, is that a mill? She said, yes, it's a Sanchez Mill. And the building in the front had been converted into a residence. Mills tend to have a small footprint and are tall. And this one's totally derelict. It's on private land. This was taken with a long telephoto lens because that's what was there. That's what I had. You really couldn't get too close to it. It's overgrown in the front. So that's kind of the best view. Now, I'm going to go to the next mill. This is also in the Mora Valley. This is in La Cueva, which means the cave, by the way. This is the Vicente Romero Mill. Now, what's interesting about this is Vicente Romero is a Hispano. Most of the mills were run by Anglos. The reason is this. The Hispano people here had their money, they were wealthy, they had their money tied up in land, agriculture, animals, and so forth. The Anglos who came in were primarily Santa Fe Trail traders. They had money, so they could afford to make the mills. This one was built in 1870 and was used until 1949. There's a story about Romero that when he was a very young man, this is why this is called La Cueva, by the way, he was a sheep herder and he lived in a cave. This is on the way to Mora, by the way. Right before you get to Mora, you go through La Cueva. And for those of you who've been around for a while, this is where the Salmon Ranch is, which has been, the ownership has been changed a couple of times since, but where you went and picked raspberries. And the mill was on that property. It was built in 1870 and it had a capital investment of $20,000. This one was interesting because it had two sets of stones in there. One set was a course in which they ground corn and oats for animal feed. The fine stones were used to grind wheat to make fine flour. It also generated electricity, and they ceased in 1949. Most of the milling stopped, both the Spanish mills and the big commercial mills stopped about the time of World War II. Anyway, this is part of the mill. This has a water wheel, a metal water wheel on it, and their water, it's a very interesting complex because there's water things flowing around and stuff. And when I went up, I went in and asked them about the mill, and the little girls in the shop said they didn't know anything about it, which is probably right. Since that time, it's changed hands. One of the things that the people in the Mora Valley want to do is have this mill, the mill in Mora, and the Cleveland Mill, which I haven't shown you yet, as a mill, there's a mill fest at the Cleveland Mill. They want to do all three mills. And they finally got, no one could ever get in there. They wouldn't let anybody in there. Again, they're dangerous. OSHA would not approve, okay? But a couple of the guys from the Mora Mill got in and they photographed it. I have not seen the photographs yet. This is the backside of the mill. And there's on the left, you can kind of see a building and it goes way back. So this was a rather extensive mill. These are the mills that are not in the Mora Valley. And the first one is the Aztec Mill. And I picked this one first. It's from 1864. It's in Cimarron. And the reason I picked this was because this was a St. Vrain Mill too. My understanding, it was a St. Vrain Mill. I went up a couple of times, and when I talked to the docent there, he said, Yeah, it's the St. Vrain Mill. There's very little of it left, and I have some photographs of the interior. The picture on the right is the 19th century photograph of the mill. The one on the left, or the one on the left is the 19th century. The one on the right is one I took several years ago. Now, this plaque is on the site of the mill, and it says this water-driven corn and wheat mill was constructed about 1860, and it says 64 on top, as a Indian agency headquarters, served as the Indian agency headquarters for neighboring Utes and Jicarilla Apaches from 61 to 76. So a lot of this, a lot of the flour and stuff was being used for the reservations. And this one says 1864 on the title of the door, Aztec Mill. Now those S things on the top, metal S things, you'll see those in old buildings. Those aren't decorations. What they do is in the old buildings, the walls tend to bow out. And so what they do is they put those in there, and there's a rod or a shaft that goes all the way across the building. There are bolts on the end, and they tighten them up, and that holds the building together. So if you see those, they may put them in to start with, just so it doesn't bow out, but that's why they're there. They're not decoration. This is the millstone in the Aztec Mill. It was over in the corner. Not quite sure why, but this is very little of what's left in this mill. Again, this is a problem with looking for old mills and things, that this stuff isn't there. So the photograph on the right, you see a little small wheel. This drives the millstones. The one on the left drives the millstones. The one on the right is just a close-up of the same thing. And the big wheel here is driven by, and you can see the gears down below, by the water wheel. And those boards in there are kind of a recreation of a water wheel. There is a belt that goes around that to the other little wheel. Now, if you look at the side of that, next to that beam, you'll see that it's curved out. That is called a crown. And we had a problem with our mill here because the belt kept falling off. And what happens is the crown was worn down. And the crown forces the belt over like this, and it won't slip. It doesn't go down. I learned how to put the belt back up with a lot of help in our mill here. This is basically the water wheel. And I thought this is interesting because it's inside the mill. I thought, wow, they could mill in the winter. And then I realized it had this really long flume coming down. It's going to freeze in the winter. So no, I don't think so. What would puzzle me kind of was, if you look under the window, you'll see a gear over there, and the gear here, they don't match. So I don't know how they got the power from the water wheel back to that gear, but they had something in there. And this one then is a close-up of the bearings and so forth. You can see how this is done. This is a second story. Now, the Philmont Scout Ranch is just down, the Boy Scout Ranch is just down the road from Cimarron. And so the second story is a Boy Scout museum. And I was a Boy Scout once, and I thought it was kind of interesting. The upper floor just was stuff. The basement, so this has 4 stories. There's the basement, first, second, and third story. The upper one had just a collection of stuff. The bottom one had kind of period things in there too. It's an interesting mill. It's kind of worth the trip. And if you go, I recommend that you stop by this St. James Hotel, have lunch, and the bar's right there. And that's not why you go there. You go over there and look at the bar and look up, and you count the bullet holes in the ceiling. The floor above the ceiling was the owner's apartment. It's 4 inches thick, because the guys would get in there and would shoot at the ceiling. Anyway, this is the Pendaries Mill. It was done by Jean Pendaries. All these names are French. There was a tremendous French influence in New Mexico, particularly later in the 19th century. This was built in 1975. Again, this was taken from a long ways away. I've since gone back and rephotograph this, and if you look kind of to the left of the building, you'll see a long flume, and that flume goes on forever. but it was used for 3 generations, and it was used as a commercial mill also for the soldiers and the people who were living at Fort Union. It's on the National Register of Historic Places in 1978. I did talk to a ancestor of the Pendaries. He didn't have much knowledge about the mill. Now, this is the Loma Parda mill, and this is the problem of looking for old mills. It was built by Charles Deutschmann, served Fort Union from the 70s and the 80s, and they would do about 120 bushels a day. Loma Parda is an interesting place. It's on private land. Going right through the middle of it is a county road. And so as long as you stay on the county road, you're okay. I've been out there about 3 times. The upper photograph is a canova or a flume across an arroyo, because you can't run the acequia across there. So I thought that was really interesting, and I thought about going back and rephotographing it from the other direction because the light maybe was better. But the bottom one, which is just a shaft with a pulley on it, that's all that's left. And sometimes that's all you can find. In Whatrous, the La Junta mill was built by Moore, Koenig, and Whatrous, 61 to 1904. This would do about 100 bushels a day from a single set of burrs, millstones. Okay, the water wheel was 12 foot in diameter and 4 foot wide. So ours here is 20 feet in diameter and not that wide. It was destroyed by a flood in 1904, and at the time, it was owned by Juan Montoya. It was rebuilt by Tony George and ran to the 1940s. Now, how to get me in here? This was actually a complex, and it was an amazing place. It's on private land, and the museum did a field trip out there. We went to Fort Union and here and a couple of other places on a field trip. And there was this whole complex of these kind of walls which were left over from buildings, and we think this is the one I'm standing in. I looked at it and I thought this was the basement of a mill, I went down there and then someone took my camera and photographed me. But again, that's sometimes all you find. The only mills extant in Taos are a foundation. That's it. Now, this is El Molino Grande de Sapello. The original location of the mill was on the Ledger Farm near San Ignacio. It is not in Sapello, although that's the biggest thing there. When you go out, I've been out there, if you go out there, it's sort of semi-habited, and it's kind of interesting. I found some documents in our archives that talked about the purchase of the mill and so forth, and where it actually was. Now, this is the mill. I had come out here in the winter. This is a gorgeous place in the winter, by the way, as long as there's no snow. And if you're a volunteer, you have the gate code anyway. Or you can hit the button and they'll let you in. But it is an interesting place in the winter, and kind of my favorite season out here. Brief history of the mill. They're not certain about the date build. I looked at a document, and I have a copy of it, but in the archives, and the document was a reminiscence of a man who was 80 years old, and he was looking back to when he was in single digits, 6, 7 years old. How much can you remember when you were 7 years old? So this was sort of, he wasn't sure whether they rehabbed his grandfather's mill or they built the mill again or whatever. It was built or renovated by Florencio Pacheco, and the Pachecos kept it for a long time. Now, they bought a kit to build a mill from John T. Noy and Son in Buffalo, New York. And I looked it up. I looked up the Junta, and there was a nice little website on there for, I don't know if they're still in, but they were purveyors of mills and other machinery and things. His son conveyed the mill to the Ledgers in 1923. And again, the problem with it, it had a turbine on it. It came with the kit. And the problem with the turbine is when it breaks down, you got to fix it, and it's expensive. And so what they did was they purchased a water wheel from a sawmill. It was 8 miles upriver, and somehow they got it down and put it on. And they ran the mill. The current millstones that are in there now that are in the tin can, we call it a tin can, was added in about 1910. It was acquired by Golondrinas from Prudencio Ledger in October of '67, and he paid $125 for it. $50 was for lumber. There was a bunch of lumber or something in there, and they bought the lumber too, and that was used in the structure. And again, they only bought the machinery. They did not buy the building. It's an adobe. You could move it, but be too expensive, and it just moving it. I have talked to people who said they moved adobe buildings, but it seems what I don't know. Okay, there was a restoration done in 1989. What I got 2 stories. An object, one said a shoe, the other one said a rock, was thrown into the machinery. The shafts, the gears, and everything were over 100 years old, and it was not the best steel in the world. It just turned into a pretzel, and so a lot of the shafting, the bearings, and everything were replaced in 1989. This is the mill as the Pelajemos bought it and what was left. And I assume that's the water wheel that was on there. There's a whole series of pictures of the water wheel in the mill in the archives. This is a blank page, and I have to apologize to you people. The software I used to do the original PowerPoint and the software I have now don't talk to each other. And I was going to put a photograph of what the mill looks like now, but it didn't go in, so it's a blank page. Sorry about that. I'm not a really whiz at computers. Now, this is our water wheel. This is the replacement. It's made out of white oak, and it's been there since '89. So as I said, wooden water wheels don't last very long, 10 years. This one's pampered. Usually Sean and the crowd cover it with a tarp over the winter to keep the water off. The water doesn't hurt it. The ice does. It gets in the cracks and expands and it breaks things down. This has about 1,200 pounds of downforce, and we turn it about 12 RPM. And it's a visual thing, actually. I look at the water comes up on the left side of the mill there, right in the kind of the corner. As the water comes up, it throws it up. It kind of makes a little arc, and if you catch the right time of day, you get a nice rainbow. But that arc is how we tell how fast it's going. There's one of the shafts on there is marked, and I sat with a watch and counted, and that's how I time. You could time it with a watch. And it said it would do 5 tons of flour a day. And I put a lot of question marks under there because I don't think it will. The output on a mill is determined by how big the millstones are. And I don't think it'll do 5 tons of fill, maybe 1 or 2. I don't know. Now, this is the transfer of the vertical movement into a horizontal movement on the left. And when I first started to learn how to run this mill, the gentleman who actually helped build the water wheel said, here, take this, and there's a big can of gloppy grease called open gear grease, because if you use regular grease, it would just throw it off when the mill was running. This is very sticky stuff. And you dip a stick in there and you put it on there with the mill running. Not safe. He said, if mill takes the stick, let go. I said, okay. He said, the stick used to be twice as long. Yeah, I did learn later how to do it with the mill not running, which when I showed the other people how to do the mill, I showed them how to do it that way. I tend to be a little cavalier about some things. The image on the right is now transferring the horizontal movement to a vertical shaft, which runs the next slide, which is the drive wheel for the mill. This has a big wooden wheel. I think it's 11 feet in diameter. The belt is 33 feet long and 11 inches wide. And trying to get that back up if it falls down is interesting, to say the least. The right photograph, if you'll notice, it's kind of that black iron bar under there. Most of the mills have this. It's called a bridge tree. And the shaft that goes up from it, and the next photograph I'll show you, is how you adjust the stones. So this is the end of, if you look at the metal can here, the wheel on there, by adjusting that, you can adjust the gap in the stones. This is called, this mill is an underrunner. Now, the millstone that move, one's always static, one moves. Most of the stone mills are overrunners. The top stone moves, the bottom one is static. This one, the bottom stone moves, the top one is static. And the top half of that, you can kind of see a seam there, the top half that just lifts off. And then if you want to get inside of it to do the stones, to sharpen them or whatever, you have to undo the bolts. Now, this is in the basement, and this is the separator. The separator is basically a large fan that blows the dust, chaff, anything off, so you get relatively clean grain. Some of them, they will wash the grain. It has to do with the milling. I've looked down there, and this is just sitting there. I've looked down there several times, and I think, we ought to be able to hook that up. And there's no way. Without doing a whole lot of really bizarre stuff, it's no way. If you look on the photograph on the right, you'll see two vertical, looks like square beams. Those are hollow. Those have grain elevators in them. They take the grain up through the middle floor to the top floor, and you can see the elevator on the top. It dumps the grain into the chute and goes down into a hopper. And as long as we're up here, this is what it looks like up there now. Let me see. The first wheel ran, there was, on the right side, which is out of the photograph, looks like the residuals that there was a generator up there to generate electricity. And I think that large wheel was for that. The second wheel in runs the grain elevator. And for years, we thought about hooking it up, and finally, Jerry and I went up there, and we did hook it up. Took them a while. The next one with the belt that goes down runs the bolter, and we'll look at the bolter in just a minute. And then the last one is the belt that runs the grain elevator that brings the flour up. Actually, it's called middlings. It's everything that went through the grain, everything that went through the mill goes up and comes down. On the extreme right, you'll see a chute going down into the bolter. This is what it looked like in the original site. Same stuff. And you have, I think the belts are gone and things are backwards. I don't know. If you look at the original mill and ours, the layout is a little bit different. These are on top of these two chutes is a grain elevator. There's two sides. So you fill one side and feed from the other. When that one runs out, you open the other one up. And I'll tell you a little story. I probably shouldn't. The first time I ran this mill by myself, I forgot that this was open. So I dumped in a 50-pound bag of wheat, right? And I could hear the wheat shooting out the window in the back. And I ran down the stairs, deleting a lot of expletives, and closed it up. And then we only had a limited amount of wheat to do, so I had to sweep it up and put it back in. It was an interesting day. Volunteering out here can be fun. The next photograph is looking from the second story down into the mill. The upper part is a kind of a flume or whatever, and the end over here on the extreme left are the chutes that come down from the hoppers upstairs. And by controlling how high this is, you can control the feed into it. That kind of black triangle there is called a shoe. Now, why it's called a shoe, I don't know. No one does, but it's called a shoe. And there's a stick that comes out. It's actually a dowel rod now. It comes out, and there's that little end on there, and it bangs into the end. That controls the feed into the mill. The faster it goes, the harder that hits it, and feeds more grain. As it slows down, it doesn't hit it as often, and it doesn't feed as much. So it runs itself. The little mills are like that also. Now, this is the original bolter, which is a flour sifter. And there's a belt that goes from that shaft in the third story, or the second story, around that pulley at the end, and that turns the bolter. This is as the bolter looks now. Now, those plexiglass plates weren't there. We put those on so that you could see what was happening. And usually, if I'm doing a tour or something, I will take, and you can see the bolter on the right there, I will take the wooden part out to show them what happens. The bolter turns around and it sifts the flour. This has 3 grades of flour. The first one is pure white flour. And the problem with pure white flour is it has no food value in it. It's stable, but it has absolutely no food value. Now, if you add the bran to it, which is the hull, outside hull, and which is bran, and you add that to it, it has oil in it that goes rancid in, depending on the temperature and the humidity, 3 to 5 days. The next one is a close-up of the bolter, and you can see the flour has come down, and the auger turns, and it moves the flour down, and then there's some slots here. You pull a little thing out, and it drops down. There's a slot there. It drops down into the sack. Normally would hang underneath it. We don't do that much milling, so we just lay the sack across the top. The health department doesn't love us very much, and we have to throw everything we mill away. I have made bread from both mills, or Susan did, but it's interesting. Anyway, those are the stone mills, and I left the Cleveland roller mill until last because it's a modern mill. And it is in the Mora Valley. And if you go to the St. Vrain Mill in Mora, it's just up the road a ways. And next to it is a relocated Maximiliano Cruz mill. And I was talking to Susan about how the mill was different from our mill here. And this guy comes up to me and he wants to know why the white guy from Santa Fe knows more about mills than he does. So I talked to him for a while, and he knew Cruz. He said he was a jerk. I got that from millers were considered disreputable people for a lot of reasons. But anyway, this was built by the Cassidy family, and Dan Cassidy currently is one of the ancestors, currently owns this, and they open it on weekends. With the pandemic, I don't know. But they open this on weekends, and then normally on Labor Day, they have a mill fest for 2 days. I stopped running on the 4 days. It is running, and they do run it. It's complete, and they do run it. They do not mill flour. If you mill flour, it would take 200 or 300 pounds of wheat just to get the stuff to come through. And this is a big mill. And then you have to clean it all out because the little furry friends that visit us and leave us presents and things has to be cleaned out. And again, it uses a metal water wheel like this. Now, this is the difference. These are rollers. Now, the Cleveland Mill has 4 of them in a row. And they look like, and I don't know if you can really see it, I can see it, and I don't know what shows up on the screen, but if you look kind of in the center around the rust marks, you'll see it's like corduroy. And the two rollers go like this. And you set the rollers half the distance that you want to go. And so that's what mills it. And the first one gives you a coarse, and you get finer, finer, and then pure white flour. And anyway, this is different. This is what mills now use. These are some of the machines, and I have absolutely no idea what this stuff is for. I thought it was cool machinery, so I photographed it. I don't know what it does. There's belts and stuff all over this. Usually on the 19th century mills, there's one power source, a steam engine, a water wheel, or whatever, and a lot of belts. Modern mills and things, they put a motor, electric motor usually, on everything. So I don't know. These are grain elevators, and these go up and down when the mill's running. It's kind of cool. Sit there and watch these go up and down, but that's what the grain elevators actually look like. And if you look at that woodwork, this is high-end woodwork. There are no knots in any of this stuff. This is beautiful wood. This is 19th century wood. This is the bolter, and if you look behind the guy's head, you'll see kind of a trap door or a door there. That section is one section of a bolter. There's one to the right of him, and there are 4 of them. There's 2 behind that. And I walked back there, and then when I got home, I had a T-shirt and something on, and I got home, there was a stripe across my shirt from the belt. These are nuts. Now, why they let somebody go back there, I don't know, but I did anyway. I thought it was cool. Anyway, this is how this kind of works. These are eccentrics, and they drive you can kind of see the 4 boxes there. And this kind of an eccentric, and so they move like this. And so the bolters shake like that. This is a dust bin, basically. It catches the dust and stuff. And then this is what happens when the flour's done, they bag it, and then they would ship it out. This is the unit, and I'm open for questions. If you have them, I will answer as best I can, or what I usually say is I have good, credible lies. You have a question?
You mentioned a mill federation. Is there a national federation of guys like you that?
There are, well, what I talked about was a foundation, and that is the group in Mora, and it's called the St. Vrain Mill Preservation, I think History or something, Foundation. And if you just put St. Vrain Mill Foundation, you'll get it on, you Google it or whatever, and you will get the website. And I think it's $25 a year or something, which is money well spent to join the foundation. And every year they have a business meeting, and they do things up there. And it's kind of an interesting thing, and the people are really nice. There are several national organizations. One of them is called SPOOM, the Society for the Preservation of Old Mills. They have a website, they have a YouTube site or a Facebook site too. They have a quarterly publication they put out, and I bought books from them on mills, but it's a national organization. There's another one, I forget what it's called. It's about old grist mills or something. But if you look up things like that, a lot of the information I found on here, I got actually on the internet because there isn't that much around. When Earl Porter did the restoration of the little mill, he figured, well, I can do that. I'll just go down to the library at UNM or something, and hey, or the state archives, and hey, it'll all be there. There's zero there. There's nothing written down. So he had to kind of resurrect things. That answer your question?
It does, thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah. Pull your mask down, I'm hard of hearing.
On the map, it shows 5 mills here at Golondrinas. 5 mills at Golondrinas.
There are 5 mills here.
Yeah,
Okay.
so.
The Molino Grande, which is the big mill, is here. The Truchas Mill, the only mill still running, is a small Spanish mill. And then over by the blacksmith shop is the Golondrinas Mill, which is shut down. And then across from the agricultural field is the Talpa Mill. That's from 1820. And the wheelwright shop, which is a blacksmith shop now, was a mill at one time. And so what happens to a lot of these, I talked to a guy who saved a mill, he called it a fuerte, it's a strong place. And he saved it because the guy that owned it and he bought it because the guy that owned it was gonna cut it up for firewood. And they get repurposed for things, they get torn down, they just get, they fall down. And finding things is difficult. But again, there are 3 actual mills here. The 5th one is the wheelwright shop.
So two work?
The large Molino Grande work, sort of. We have some repair problems with it. And the problem with this is, where do you get 19th century stuff? So, and the little mill, although we haven't run it because of the pandemic and because of the water issues, we haven't run the small mill for a year or 2. There is a, I'll mention this again, there is a, if you're interested in the small mills, there is a video that we did 2 years ago in 20 of that mill. It's either on the YouTube channel, Golondrinas channel on YouTube, or the Facebook page. And you can go down, there's a whole lot of mills, and if you're a new person there, I recommend highly that you go with you look through those mills, a lot of stuff. Julia's there doing culture and all kinds of things. And we have other people on here who have expertise in various things out here. There's a lot of really interesting videos, and the people who are in our video audience out there, there's a lot of stuff out there that you can look at that's interesting. Anyway, yeah.
Did they grow a lot of wheat in the Mora Valley?
Yes, there are. You have to go through a forest to get there. There are not so many, there's a lot of trees. The water level there is higher. Although the last time I was there, the Mora River was dry. But usually it has a lot of water in it. Yeah, it's wetter out there than it is here.
I remember when you took us to the mill.
That was the same Vrain Mill.
Yeah, that was.
We did.
And we went all over. You let us go on the top and inside here, and
you have to drive through a forest, literally, from the Sapello up almost to Mora. And I remember going up there one day and there was a tree falling across the road and they were trying to chainsaw it off and you had to drive around it. It's kind of interesting. But yeah. So yeah, Mora's a cool place. Yeah, it really is. It's an interesting place to visit. Anyway, I'm going to turn this back over to Laura, and she's going to exit out. And you guys are probably tired of listening to me, so I'll give it back to Laura.
Yes, you're with me, Gordon.
Okay.
Plenty of room in the camera for both of us if you want to stay up here. A very special thank you to Gordon Mark, our, as I said, exceptionally skilled, exceptionally knowledgeable miller. We're really glad to have you. Thank you so much for being part of our mini lecture series, our Talk Tuesdays. A very special thank you to our live audience here joining us from the Palahimo Education Center on site right here at El Rancho de las Golondrinas. A very special thank you to you, our online audience. Remember, we're going to be hosting 3 more of these Talk Tuesdays every Tuesday, the month of April. We'll be covering topics such as the tradition and art of colcha embroidery. Our speaker is actually in our audience today. We will be learning about the beautiful Easter tradition of los cascarones, and we will also dive a little bit into acequias, irrigation, and farming right here at Las Golondrinas. So we hope that you all come back and join us for those Tuesdays at 11 o'clock. We will post that information on our Instagram and our Facebook, both at SF Golondrinas. Remember, we are celebrating our 50th anniversary here at Las Golondrinas in 2022, so we've got lots of events planned for you. Again, thank you so much to our guest speaker today to kick off our little mini lecture series here on Talk Tuesdays. Gordon mentioned you can also find past videos. Some of them Gordon is part of actually running the small mill here on site at Las Golondrinas. If you go to youtube.com and type in Las Golondrinas channel, we have lots of our former Golondrinas live session video for you to check out. So just keep up with us. We'll communicate all the details as they develop. Remember to start your adventure at golondrinas.org.